important historical fraud. By the way, the Stepanak case I discussed earlier continues to spread communist disinformation into the history of Pius XII. In the 1960s, Italian writer Carlo Falconi wrote The Silence of Pius XII, a book entirely based on documents provided to him by the communist government of Croatia, including those used to frame Stepanak. In his foreword, Falconi explained that, quote, the central core of Croatian documents that were provided to him by the communist Croatian government brought to light an entirely new and unsuspected harvest of revelations on the men and the mysterious world of high Vatican officials. Though modern writers should know better, The Silence of Pius XII remains much cited today. John Cornwell's Hitler's Pope, published in 1999, made much use of it. In fact, Cornwell praised Falconi's painstaking research while he actually spread false information manufactured by communists in Yugoslavia. Such is the power of disinformation. Thank you for your attention. I look forward to hearing the other panelists and look forward to the questions.
Thank you, Ron, for your presentation and showing us how Pope Pius XII, the Holy See, the Church, also religion, went from being praised to being vilified, and this campaign orchestrated to do so. The last speaker at this, our first panel, there is a second panel to follow, is Mark Riebling, author of The Church of Spies, the Pope's Secret War Against Hitler. He was research director at the Center of Policing Terrorism, and prior to his work on Pope Pius XII's efforts against National Socialism, he wrote books on crushing terrorist cells, as well as on the behind-the-scenes battle between the FBI and the CIA. He will speak to us today about Pope Pius XII and the German resistance. Mr. Riebling, thank you for your presence, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. I'd like to start by saying I think it's fitting that we're meeting today to have this remembrance here in the United Nations, because Pope Pius XII did strongly back the creation of the United Nations. He hoped that it could become a transnational conflict mediator. For most of the last 2,000 years, in fact, that mediating role was played by Papal Rome. And during the Second World War, that mediating role was played in a very secret, daring, and dangerous way by Pope Pius XII himself. I think that understanding Pius XII's covert mediating role is the key to understanding his whole wartime policy, including his overt stance on the Shoah. The wartime documents delineate Pius XII's backstairs papal intrigue in almost cinematic detail. Most importantly, these documents show how Pius XII's mediating role drew him into 3 conspiracies to eliminate Hitler. The Pope's role in these plots shows that he was hardly Hitler's Pope. Indeed, in his book called Hitler's Pope, Pius's harshest critic, John Cornwell, admits that Pius plotted against Hitler. On page 234, Cornwell says that Pius XII, quote, became centrally and dangerously involved in the attempt to depose Hitler, unquote. Cornwell, however, shows little curiosity about this papal plotting. He glosses it in a single paragraph. So for a long time, because no one fit the facts together, the Pope's secret war against Hitler failed to pierce public consciousness. But if we dig down into the wartime documentation, we find what Oxford professor Owen Chadwick called, quote, one of the most astonishing episodes in the history of the modern papacy, unquote. The documents bearing on this episode are scattered throughout archives in the United States and Europe. The key evidence is in the United States Army War College, in the papers of Harold C. Deutsch, who debriefed the surviving anti-Hitler plotters for the Office of Strategic Services. Valuable evidence exists also in the archives of the British Foreign Office in Kew, England, in the Institute for Zeitgeschichte, Munich, and the Archivo Segreto of the Vatican itself in Rome. The story told in these documents begins in October 1939, when Pius XII was approached by dissident officers in the German military. These officers worried that if Hitler won the war, the Nazis would destroy the aristocracy and Christianity and many other things that conservative Germans held dear. So these dissident Germans wanted to eliminate Hitler and do a peace deal with the Western Allies. These conscientious Germans wanted Pius XII to be their secret foreign agent, partly because of his public impartiality and partly because of his reputation for discretion. These plotters considered Pius the one trusted power among powers no one could trust. Somewhat to the amazement of the German resistance, Pius XII was all in. Although known for usually taking a long time to make decisions, Pius debated less than a day before agreeing to help eliminate Hitler. When one of the Pope's trusted Jesuit advisors, Father Robert Leiber, tried to talk him out of the plotting, saying it was too dangerous, Pius XII told him to mind his own business. Now, it's important that we understand the radical nature of the Pope's conspirational leap for regime change. There are many regimes in the world today that other regimes would like changed. Some of their representatives may even be present in this room today. But it seems incredible, if not almost sacrilegious, to think that the Holy Father would plot with one of these regimes to change another. So far as I can tell, never in history had a pope engaged so directly in an attempt to overthrow a tyrant by force. But never in history had there been a Hitler, and never in history had there been a Holocaust. There is some testimony that knowledge of Nazi atrocities influenced Pius XII's decision to join the plots. The German plotters, emissary to the Pope, Joseph Müller, recalled providing photographs to Ludwig Koss, Pius's advisor on German affairs. The photographs reportedly showed Jews who had been shot in Poland and packed into ditches, in Müller's phrase, like sardines. Müller and another German resistance liaison, Hans Gisevius, believed these photographs were an important factor in Pius's rapid decision to help overthrow Hitler. In any case, Pius became a conduit between the British government and the German resistance. Gradually, the Holy Father's role expanded until he was not just a mediator, but an active plotter. At critical moments, when momentum stalled, he intervened to rejuvenate coup plans. By the war's end, Pius had participated in 3 plots to remove Hitler. In all 3, Pius held midnight meetings in the papal apartments with British diplomats trying to bring off a coup in Berlin. As we know, the plots failed. The first plot fizzled in May 1940 when German generals lost their nerve. The second plot failed on March 13, 1943, when a bomb on Hitler's plane froze at high altitude. The third plot wounded Hitler with plastic explosives planted by Klaus Schenk von Stauffenberg on July 20, 1944. But the plot unraveled because the plotters failed to cut the Nazis' communications. In the second and third plots, German Jesuits, reporting to the Pope's advisors, acted as political organizers and couriers. Through it all, Pius XII never wavered in his support for Hitler's opponents. He served as their secret foreign agent for half a decade. Now, if I had more time, I could describe each of the 3 plots and detail the Pope's role in each. I could list the 7 key provisions in the peace terms Pius brokered between the British government and what he termed, quote, any government without Hitler, unquote. I could discuss the Catholic doctrine of tyrannicide and explain how it justified Hitler's elimination and show how it inspired those who sought to eliminate Hitler. I could explain how Bavarian Jesuits obtained the blueprints to one of Hitler's bunkers and gave them to Hitler's would-be assassins, and how these priests evaded the SS by leaping across rooftops in Berlin. But I don't, alas, have time enough today to do all that. My book, Church of Spies, and the forthcoming movie based upon it will do more justice to these dramatic elements than I could do sitting here. What I'd like to do instead is reflect on some of the issues raised by this papal plotting, especially as these issues bear on remembrance of the Holocaust. First of all, even though the plots failed, they did succeed in leaving one legacy. As a 1945 OSS memo recorded, quote, Joseph Mueller had orders from the Catholic Church to negotiate with representatives of the Protestant Church in order to harmonize their measures in the struggle against Hitler, unquote. And so, Protestant clerics like Dietrich Bonhoeffer met with the Pope's closest advisors at the tomb of St. Peter in the Vatican crypt to discuss how to remove Hitler. As Pius himself remarked after the war, these underground partnerships marked, quote, the true beginning of the ecumenical movement, unquote. This ecumenical movement eventually climaxed in Nostra Aetate, the 1965 revision of the Church's teachings on other religions, including its teachings on the Jews. But Pius's secret war against Hitler left another legacy, and it was a more controversial one. That is, his so-called silence on the Holocaust. I personally would not call it a silence so much as a being careful with words. The Pope denounced the murder of anyone on the basis of race, especially in his 1942 Christmas address. At the same time, Pius tried to avoid criticizing Hitler or the Nazis by name. Documents in the Roosevelt Library show the German resistance asking Pius not to decry Nazism from the mountaintop, fearing that such criticism would cause a crackdown on resistance elements. The Pope's liaison to the German resistance, Joseph Mueller, said, quote, that his anti-Nazi organization in Germany had always been very insistent that the Pope should refrain from making any public statement singling out the Nazis, since if the Pope had been specific, Germans would have accused him of yielding to the prompting of foreign powers, and this would have made the German Catholics even more suspected than they were, and would have greatly restricted their freedom of action in their work of resistance to the Nazis. Dr. Mueller said the Pope had followed this advice throughout the war, unquote. There's a stark correlation here between the conspiracy and the silence. The first day we can document papal complicity in plots against Hitler, October 20th, 1939, is the last day during the war on which any public papal document used the word Jew. The silence and the conspiracy begin at the same time. But there's a final issue that emerges from the documents, and it has to do with why the Pope judged conspiracy a better path than denunciation. Critically, in two March 1939 transcripts, 4 German cardinals asked Pius to appease Hitler so that German Catholics wouldn't break away and form a state church as happened in Tudor England. Pius considered schism a real danger because, as he lamented, most Germans and many German Catholics believed in Hitler. So instead of protesting openly, Pius would resist secretly. In that way, Pius was like many righteous Gentiles who worked behind the scenes. He didn't advertise his hostility toward Hitler. Nevertheless, by acting to overthrow Hitler, Pius acted heroically, even if he did not always speak heroically. And haven't we all been told that actions speak louder than words? Of course, one can ask whether Pius made the right choice in privileging action over speech. In answer, one can always argue that covert resistance in dangerous situations is the best possible course. Didn't those who secretly helped Jews, for instance, do more good by living and helping others than by openly protesting the Nazis and dying on principle? But it's important on this day of remembrance to remember one key thing. The secret option did more good only because so few people were willing to openly resist in the first place. That so few were willing to offer overt resistance is, I think, an indictment of European culture. One of the shaping influences of this culture was a prejudice against Jews, going all the way back to ancient Rome. Therefore, saying that Pius was not Hitler's pope does not get European Catholics or Western civilization off the moral hook. The degree to which an ancestral Western anti-Judaism bred apathy on the fate of the Jews remains debated. Personally, I have seen little to suggest that first-century prejudices conduced to the 20th century horrors of Auschwitz. What I have seen accords rather with the testimony of an Auschwitz witness who was quoted in an article which some of you may have read on page A4 of today's New York Times. Describing the brutal forced march of 55,000 prisoners before Soviet forces liberated Auschwitz, a Polish woman recalled, quote, We knew we couldn't even show any sympathy, as if we did, we would be taken with them. I could only quietly watch through the window. That watching through the window, that paralyzed gaze, seems to me an apt metaphor for the whole European response to the Shoah. Few European Gentiles took the path of Berlin priest Bernard Lichtenberg, who expressed sympathy for the Jews and prayed for the Jews and asked to be taken away with the Jews and died en route to Dachau. Pius XII wished all German priests would take Father Lichtenberg as their model. He said so very forcefully in a letter to the Bishop of Berlin. But while Pius was quick to praise this kind of martyrdom, he did not feel that he could command it. As Holy Father, protecting his flock, Pius could not order priests or lay Catholics to die or to put themselves at mortal risk by resistance. Resistance was a matter of conscience, and only extraordinary individuals would risk everything to stop Hitler. When some of those individuals reached out to Pius in October 1939, he hitched his policy to their tragic star. But while this choice showed Pius XII's strong will, it was, in another sense, a confession of weakness. It was an acknowledgement that few martyrs like Father Lichtenberg were in prospect among either the clergy or the laity. And it was this realism, I believe, that decided Pius in favor of secret rather than open resistance. Judging that he couldn't lead a church of saints, Pius settled for a church of spies. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Riebling, for your presentation and the presentation of documenting the efforts of Pope Pius XII and his opposition to Hitler and to National Socialism, also raising the questions about how to respond, what route to take in responding to the horror. And in doing so, you echoed the comments of Judge Theodore Meron at this morning's UN Holocaust Remembrance Service in the hall of the General Assembly. This very moving moment this morning that many of us had the great joy of attending. We are now going to change panels. I would like to thank Professors Husson Rischlach and Mr. Riebling for their presentations and invite the next four speakers to take their place on the dais. As this transition occurs, I would like to reiterate that if you have a question and you would like to present it, please send it via email to the address questions@holyseemission.org. I don't think there's time for you to get a coffee, but I encourage you to talk amongst yourselves for the next 30 seconds as we prepare the panel. So, ladies and gentlemen, we are ready to start with the second panel. If I can encourage you to take your seats. Our next speaker is Dr. Michael Hesemann, who is a professor of history at Gustav Sievert Academy in Germany. He is the author of the book The Pope and the Holocaust, as well as scores of other works. He will speak to us this afternoon about what the archives reveal about Pope Pius XII and the Holocaust. Dr. Hesemann, welcome to the United Nations, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, was Eugenio Pacelli, who later became Pope Pius XII, a typical child of his time, which had its anti-Semitic or at least anti-Judaist tendencies, even in the highest ranks of the Catholic Church? No, he was different. Although he belonged to Rome's black nobility, his parents sent him to a secular school, the Visconti High School. Eugenio's best friend was an Orthodox Jewish boy, Guido Mendes, from a family of famous physicians. The future Pope was often a guest of the Mendes family, where he participated at Shabbat and Pesach celebrations. Eugenio studied the works of Jewish scholars and promised to learn Hebrew one day to understand their deeper meaning. He never forgot his friend. When Mussolini introduced the racial laws in Italy in 1938, Pacelli helped the Mendes family to escape to Switzerland and from there to Palestine. He received Guido Mendes on several occasions after the war when he was Pope. This early school friendship and connection with Judaism begins to explain how Pacelli developed an awareness and appreciation for Jewish customs, instrumental in contributing to his formation as a career diplomat of the Holy See. As Undersecretary for External Affairs, he received World Zionist Organization President Nahum Sokolov in 1917 and introduced him to Pope Benedict XV. Sokolov was so enthusiastic about the warm reception he received at the Vatican that in 1925, when Pacelli was in Berlin, he visited him again, especially to consult him on how to approach the new Pope Pius XI after the signing of the Balfour Declaration to discuss a Jewish homeland in Palestine. Indeed, when he was nuncio in Munich from 1917 to 1925 and in Berlin from 1925 to 1929, Pacelli always supported the Jewish and Zionist cause. He used all channels of Vatican diplomacy to try to help the Rabbi Werner of Munich to get palm leaves for Sukkot, when during World War I, the borders of Italy were closed. In 1917, right after the Armenian genocide, Jewish settlers in Palestine were threatened by the Turks. Pacelli managed to bring the potential fate of the Jewish settlers to the attention of the Berlin Reichstag. Turkey's most important ally at the time, the Reich, forced the Turks to replace the commander in charge for Syria and Palestine, Kemal Pasha, with a German general from Falkenhayn who stopped the massacres, protected the Jews, and eventually handed Jerusalem over to the British to avoid a bloodshed at the holy sites. Thus, as early as 1917, Pacelli had already intervened to save virtually 10,000 of Jews from a probable genocide. In 1930, Pope Pius XI made Pacelli his new Secretary of State, the number 2 position in the Vatican. When on April 1st, 1933, the Nazis attacked Jewish shops in Germany, Pacelli brought this to the attention of the Pope, Pius XI. Pacelli asked the new nuncio in Berlin, Cesare Orsenigo, and the head of the German Bishops' Conference, Cardinal Michael von Faulhaber, whether a diplomatic intervention by the Holy See would help, quote, in the case of the anti-Semitic excesses in Germany. Both denied. The campaign against the Jews came from the Nazi government, they said, and support for the Jews would only, quote, add to the war against the Jews another war against the Catholics, as Faulhaber stated. Still, Pacelli made his position known. When in March 1939 he was elected Pope and became Pius XII, the Jewish Veteran, an American publication, reflected the reaction of the Jewish community, calling his election, quote, a source of great satisfaction to Jews. Why? Quote, Pope Pius XII is known as a staunch friend of Jews, and on several occasions expressed his strong opposition to the persecution of Jews in Germany and Italy. He even served distinguished Jewish visitors to the Holy See kosher food and was known as a vigorous champion of the Vatican's anti-Nazi policy, so much so that the anti-Semitic fascists in Italy tried hard to prevent Cardinal Pacelli's election, unquote. Indeed, as Pope, Pacelli never denied his sympathy for the Jews. On November 28, 1941, young Heinz Wissler smuggled himself into an audience of German soldiers to appeal to the Pope to help his 500 fellow Jewish refugees shipwrecked in the Aegean Sea and waiting for rescue in an Italian refugee camp on the island of Rhodes. The Pope greeted him with open arms and told him repeatedly, "You are a young Jew. I know what it means, and I hope you will always be proud to be a Jew. And, quote, my Jewish friend, go with the protection of the Lord, but never forget, you must always be proud to be a Jew." Of course, he also helped. Within weeks, the 500 refugees were brought to the Ferramonti camp in southern Italy, where, under the control of the nuncio and a resident Capuchin father, they received regular supply of goods and gifts from the Pope and survived the war in good health and humane conditions. But what did Pacelli, Pius XII, think about the Nazis? Did he consider them a lesser evil compared to communism? The documents indicate a different position. Arguably, no one of the Vatican knew Germany and the Nazis better than Eugenio Pacelli, who had lived in Germany for over 12 years, both in Munich and Berlin, and had witnessed the rise of Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party from the very beginning. As early as 1923, when Hitler attempted his first revolt in Munich, Pacelli sent a report to the Vatican entitled, quote, "The anti-Catholic character of a Nazi revolt." He noted, quote, "violent agitation against the Catholic clergy, slander and mockery against priests, and especially Cardinal Archbishop Michael von Faulhaber, who, quote, during his homily in the Cathedral of Munich, denounced the persecution of the Jews." Pacelli never revised his negative opinion on the Nazis, and in 1924 spoke of the, quote, fanatically anti-Catholic Nazi Party. He even called Nazism probably the most dangerous heresy of our times. A very clear, powerful statement. Since, quote, it put state and race above all, above true religion, above the truth, and about justice. I think we can all agree with this. The same Cardinal von Faulhaber, a personal friend of Pacelli, joined the clerical circle Amici di Israele, Friends of Israel, consisting of 19 cardinals, 287 archbishops and bishops, and over 3,000 Catholic priests, all pleading for reconciliation of Catholicism and Judaism. The result of the campaign was a decree on March 25, 1925, by the Holy Office, the Congregation for the Doctrine of Faith of the Catholic Church, condemning without exception any hate against the God-chosen people, a hate which is commonly known as anti-Semitism. Very clear statement, once again. Supported by Pacelli, in 1930, several German bishops and archbishops called National Socialism a heresy. The Diocese of Mainz, followed by the Bavarian and Rhinish bishops, published a decree declaring it forbidden for every Catholic to become a registered member of the Nazi Party, under threat of immediate excommunication. This position was officially supported by the Holy See with a detailed report in Osservatore Romano, the official paper of the Holy See, launched by Pacelli. In 1932, according to the German Bishops' Conference, it was declared not allowed for Catholics to belong to the Hitler Party since its program contained heresies. When Pacelli became Pope in 1939, the German consul in Cologne, Alfred Clifford, the American consul in Cologne, Alfred Clifford, recalled a meeting with him in 1937 when Vatican Secretary of State, and wrote to the U.S. State Department, quote, his Pacelli's views surprised me by their extremeness. He said that he exposed unalterably every compromise with National Socialism. He regarded Hitler not only as an untrustworthy scoundrel, but as a fundamentally wicked person, not capable of moderation. He told me that he supported the German bishops in their anti-Nazi stand. The risk of losing a large part of the Catholic youth in Germany, he said, was not as great as the consequences to the Catholic Church in general in surrendering to the Nazis.